Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. We caught up earlier today with David Minchin. He's the CEO of Helium. So many requests from people out there for us to talk to them and for us to get a little bit of an education on the helium market macro factors. We do that today. So if you want our thoughts and opinions on the conversation, what he had to say and the company's plans for 2021, you can find that at cruxinvestor.com/club. You can also find on there our detailed company reports. There are commentaries from market experts from around the world on a variety of commodities and companies. There are training videos on there to help you with your diligence process. There are summaries of other interviews that we've done just to save you a bit of time. And if you want an environment where you can share your thoughts and ideas with like-minded investors, go and join them at cruxinvestor.com/club. And of course, we'd love your feedback too. So do give us a like, first of all, and leave your comments below because we will get back to absolutely every one of you. And if you want to see what we talked about today, take a look in the description. David, how are you doing, sir?
Nice to meet you, Matthew.
Yeah, nice to have you on the show. Yeah, we've not spoken before, obviously, and we've not heard your story, but we were keen to talk to you because we're getting a lot of inbound about helium. People are excited about helium at the moment, and you're going to educate us in a second. But first of all, I need to announce to our regular viewers, you're also a friend of Mr. Brandon Monroe, aren't you?
Yeah, he was a chairman of Scandinavian, which was the company I was chief executive before moving to Helium 1. So yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
What's he really like? I mean, you can tell us.
He's absolutely brilliant, which is a shame because you'd hope beneath that calm exterior there was some deep, dark secrets, but it's not. He's just a lovely guy.
We're digging furiously. Can't find a thing. Spotless. Well, look, just want to. So where are you first of all?
At the moment, I'm in Godalming, but I've had a busy week. I'm preparing to move my family to Dar es Salaam, flying out on Monday morning to stay there for a 3-month period.
Okay.
So it's important. I mean, we're listed in London, but our project is in Tanzania. So we're a Tanzanian focused company. I think it's important for me as the chief executive, spend some time in the country, meets the important people, and gets to know how things are operating and running on the ground. So I can make sure that when we start drilling, we can run a smooth and efficient program. Absolutely.
Going to make some friends. I remember I've done a little bit of business out there myself with a port and a hospital. Wonderful country, wonderful people, very, very friendly indeed. Hey, but tell me this, because when I say helium to people, they go party balloons, right? And I'm sure you get that everywhere you go. So you're going to help us here because I think there's some very avid helium fans. And then there are people who don't know much, but might like to, given the kind of niche nature of this. So helium, what's it used for? Who are the main players? What's the market? Just give us a bit of background, please.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a significant hurdle actually for investing because a lot of people they don't know that helium comes out of the ground. They don't know that it's used for anything other than for party balloons and squeaky voices, and they don't know that it's in critical under supply and is one of those high value commodities which is essential for the future of the technological growth of our economy. So helium is used in a wide range of high value and next gen technology applications. It's got a number of unique properties which makes it unsubstitutable in a range of high value end usage. It's got the lowest boiling point of any gas. So if you want to cool something to within 5 degrees of absolute zero, for instance, to take advantage of its superconducting properties, you need to use helium. So that's what it's used for in MRI scanners, to cool the magnets in MRI scanners. That's a massively growing market as MRI scanners moves from being something used only in hospitals in the first world to being something that's part of a diagnostic toolkit of doctors and physicians around the globe. It's also used in a number of next-gen technology manufacturing processes. So it's used in semiconductor chip manufacturing, large quantities. China is the double the amount is imported over the last 10 years as the semiconductor chip industry has increased. And it looks like it's set to double it again in the next 10 years. It's used in fiber optics. Again, China importing a huge amount in construction fiber optics because it's got the smallest pore size of any gas. If you want to make a very high purity glass, you need to make it in a helium atmosphere. So by making your fiber optics in a helium atmosphere, you guarantee minimal data loss across the length of the cable. So things like, it's used in flat panel display manufacturing, stuff which is going to be the dominant technology in the next 10 years. And indeed, China is an important market for helium because it doesn't have any helium at all domestically. So it's imports about 1 billion cubic feet a year, and that's set to increase dramatically as we increasingly use things with flat panel displays, with semiconductor chips, and the Internet of Stuff. We fiber optic cables need to go everywhere. It's actually speaking of the Internet of Stuff, data centers are using a huge amount of helium. Google and Netflix buy a huge amount every year because it's used in high density hard drives. So if you replace the air gap in a hard drive with helium, because it's got the lowest viscosity of any gas, it can increase the efficiency of the hard drive. So it means it uses less energy, it produces less heat.
Okay. So you've talked about some of the properties there. You've talked about some of the use cases there, and you talked about some of the industrial uses and users there. So, and this is something which can't be synthesized, but can it be substituted?
Not really. You see, like where it's being used, it's a high value gas. You only use it in a manufacturing process where you need to use it, and generally you can't replace it with something else. In instances where you can replace it with something else, then you do replace it with something else because it costs a lot and supplies are in short demand. So no, if you're building a semiconducting chips, these are such high value product, you need to make sure that you've got the helium, and you need to make sure it's of the highest spec. If you're SpaceX launching your rocket, they use thousands of liters of helium every time they launch a rocket, because it purges the hydrogen fuel out of the boosters. You can't substitute it for anything else because you risk of uncontained explosions. And also, out of a rocket launch, your 10,000 liters of helium is probably the cheapest part of getting that satellite into space. So you just have to use it, and you use it at any price.
Right, but in that use case, which I think is extreme, and they're few and far between, but something more common, like the manufacture of chips, for instance, which you're talking about China sort of doubling and then doubling again. So, and I do want to get onto the macro around the supply and the demand gap that there is at the moment. In scenarios like that, and we sort of see it in rare earths, where either something becomes too expensive, right? Obviously, shortage of supply, and if it's in demand, price goes up, basic economics, right? But if it gets to a point where it becomes too expensive, we're quite ingenious little buggers, the human race. We find substitutes. We find ways around it, workarounds. Are you saying at the moment that there's nothing else out there which is even coming close to delivering the benefits of helium?
Absolutely. In fact, what I'm saying is that all of the instances where helium would be a better thing, but you can substitute it for something else, those have already happened. In the last 3 years, the price in helium imported helium into China has increased from about $200 per MCF up to $375 per MCF. So it's already seen a 150% pricing increase. All the instances where you can substitute helium have been removed, which means two things. One, it means that there will be, the demand which we have now can't really erode, especially because these are growing industries. But importantly, if the price was to be reduced, there's latent demand for operations which would rather use helium.
Okay, so you're saying it in terms of replacing it at the moment. That's unlikely. So I need to understand what the size of the market is, and understand, again, who the players are. Because I think if I look at your PowerPoint, people should look at your PowerPoint. We'll put a link below. You're looking at some of your peers. These are not big companies. Okay. So what is the size of the market? And tell me about this gap between supply and demand at the moment.
So the size of the market at the moment is about 6 billion cubic feet. And that's predicted to increase over the next 10 years to 8.5 billion cubic feet. The value of that market, well, depending on what sort of that price you use on helium, you're looking at anything between $2.5 up to $4.5 billion per year. The main players or the main producers are companies like ExxonMobil, Qatar Gas, Ras Gas are going to come in as well. And so it's produced by majors as a byproduct of liquid natural gas production. Now, this is important because the supply is genuinely quite inflexible. It's a low-grade byproduct from multi-billion-dollar gas developments. So, for instance, the Qataris are producing at a grade of 0.05% helium associated with hydrocarbon. The Qatar North gas field development, which is going to add about another 350,000 MCF of production a year, that's costing $23 billion to construct. So it's clearly not supported on the helium economics alone. It's supported from a natural gas, which is also an important point to make, because as we reduce our dependence on hydrocarbon over the next 50 years and transition towards a green economy, those large liquid natural gas facilities aren't going to be built, and we are going to see a reduction in hydrocarbon, a reduction in the price of hydrocarbon, but we're still going to need a supply of helium for the high tech and medical applications that we use it for. So I think there is a strong reason for a new form of primary helium supply to come onto the market. A primary helium supplier who's got a high grade deposit, is focused just on helium economics and focused on helium supply and demand.
Okay, well, tell me about that. So you've got all these majors. Here's a byproduct, a very small byproduct are producing helium and feeding that into the market. Because we see this in a bunch of other commodities where you've kind of got people like the Rio Tintos producing copper, and they're chucking out uranium as a byproduct. They don't care about the price; they just want rid of it because it's not core to them. Has that affected the price of helium to date?
It's hard to say. Certainly, it's a fact that's taken into consideration. We're not going to be displacing any of these producers because they're making it as a byproduct, and it's not quite zero cost, but certainly it's not their profit center. But at the same time, they're not going to increase their production, and they're not focused on providing material for helium per se. They're not focused on. They don't. The end users want to have someone with some flexibility and with some guarantee of supply, because if you need to close down a line on the Qataris need to close down a line of their hydrocarbon facility, then you will lose helium supply because of that.
Right. So let's talk about how you, small player, well, certainly you, because you just went public in December. How do you insert yourself into the supply chain? Because, like, again, just to keep on that analogy of, the copper producer producing uranium as a byproduct, dumping into the market at any price because it doesn't matter to them. It's helped. One of the reasons to kind of keep uranium prices deflated, because the supply is always there. Your message is saying, well, we're going to be a primary producer. So I guess we better try and understand what you mean by primary producer. I guess primary focus is what you're talking about, is it?
Well, no, I mean, our gas is completely different in composition than what is already in production. While they're producing from a gas which contains between 0.05 and, say, a maximum of 0.3% helium, we've measured helium seeps at surface at 10.5% helium. So we're talking about anything up to 200 times higher grade than they're working from. Our carrier gas is nitrogen. So what we're finding at surface is helium seeping at 10% helium and 90% nitrogen, and very few other impurities. And that means that for us to come into production, our capital cost is so much less. We don't have to deal with a low value bulk commodity like liquid natural gas and develop a multi-billion-dollar developed processing plant and pipelines to coast, etc. We're able to separate out pure liquid helium, which puts into truck-mounted ISO containers, and you can drive it to the port of Dar es Salaam and mount it onto a normal container ship. And the nitrogen we can vent into the atmosphere.
Right, but see, this is the clever bit for me. The bit I don't understand is right. So you can't see it, you can't smell it. It's well, for all the reasons you said, it's a tough thing. How do you go about identifying what you've got under the ground? You're talking about surface seepages, and you're measuring it, some quite high numbers there. But how do you work out, quantify what you've got in the ground? Is it the same as regular gas? Is the process the same?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of geology, it's very similar to a normal gas type of deposit. You're subject to the same constraints of source, migration, reservoir, seal, and trap. Now, the source is completely different. Helium forms in ancient continental crust over hundreds of millions of years through the breakdown of radioactive isotopes, and it's released when that crust is opened for the very, very first time. And you have to be a specific distance away from a volcanic center to get a number of hot fluids to release the helium out of the crust and migrate it up these basement faults. But from there upwards, it's identical. So you need to have sand units to act as reservoirs with mud units on top of them to act as seals, and you need to have trap structures with closure so that you can accumulate helium and nitrogen in economic quantities. We've taken first move advantage in Tanzania to pick up all of the areas where there's high concentrations of helium seeping up into surface, and these seeps are adjacent to sedimentary filled basins, which have got the potential to store and trap the helium as it comes to surface. In Rukwa, which is our most advanced project, we've got 1,000 line kilometers of historical seismic data. We've been able to get hold of the original data tapes and reprocess that to a very high quality 2D survey over the basin. We have flown high resolution Falcon gravity gradiometry over the entire basin. That gives a great map of the basement contact based on the density difference of ancient crust and the basin fill. We've done macro seep analysis, which is identified the high-grade helium seeps at surface. We've done micro seep analysis, which is identified helium in gas, anomalous helium in gas across the basin, indicating that the helium is migrating out across the basin. So what we need to do now is to drill it to test it. So this year is a very big year. It's a transformative year for the company. We're going to start in Q1 with an infill seismic survey. That's despite the 1,000 kilometers of line of seismic we've already got. We're going to do infill work over the shallow traps that we've identified that we want to test. And that's just to make sure that we have got full confidence on closure and that we will drill at just the right spot to make sure we can identify gas. And then following on from that seismic survey in Q2 of this year, we're going to get a rig onto the ground. We're going to drill 3 holes and we're going to identify helium gas.
Okay. So let's come back to where you are, because I think, okay, you kind of outlined the process you've got to go through. This is in the middle of nowhere, it seems to me, just looking at Google, so you've got raised £6 million at IPO. Sorry, £6 million, I should say, real money. At IPO, and you kind of allocated, I guess, some of that. But what are the costs you're going to have to bear? Because the nearest town is like over 100 kilometers away. So how many? Where are you keeping people? Are you going to build a camp? I mean, how's your money being
First of all, in terms of logistics, it's not that bad. We're about 35 kilometers away from the Tanzam Highway, which is the main highway connecting the Zambian copper belt to the port of Dar es Salaam. So logistical wise, it's not that bad. It's flat-lying ground, so it's relatively simple in terms of access. It gets a bit muddy during the rainy season, which is ongoing now. But that's why we're scheduling our drilling for Q2, and we'll run the seismic as soon as the ground dries up enough for us to make sure we've got good enough ground conditions to be able to run the seismic. We're gonna have a camp. But I mean, the drill rig itself, because helium's a high value gas, you don't need to drill so deep to find economic accumulations. So we're using a slimline mineral rig. So it's a normal mineral rig. We're drilling to target traps to a maximum depth of about 1,200 meters. And the reason why we use a mineral rig is it's much lighter, which means getting access to these areas is much easier, and it's much cheaper. And we don't like wasting money.
No. Well, I'm sure your shareholders will be delighted to hear that. But in fact, I was just looking at your shares. Obviously, you've seen a bit of a pop since you listed. I think you're in the kind of the halcyon period, the 4 months after the listing. How are you going to sustain that interest? Because you're going to have to start delivering results into the marketplace, and you're going to have to because it's relatively unknown. This is kind of come back to we said it's relatively unknown space. So you're almost going to have to define what success will look like for them. You have to say, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is what we're looking for. So how do you go and talk to and educate a market whilst trying to do what you're trying to do?
I mean, first of all, we've had a good share price response from the market since we're listing. We're up 2.5 times since listing day. So, I mean, that's a great response for a company that's a month and a bit old. Secondly, I mean, we've got a long way to go on the share price. And I think this next 6 months is going to be incredibly transformative for the company. Because this is how we move from being an explorer with a good concept to being a developer with a good discovery. And that's going to be, there'll be news flow coming out of the seismic as we define the traps and refine our targets. There'll be a lot of news flow coming out once we start drilling. We'll be able to report significant helium shows as gas in mud, so we'll be monitoring helium in the drill mud as we advance each hole. If there's a significant show, then we'll be able to report that, and that's triggering the proof of concept that there is helium in the ground. Then on completion of the program, we're able to do drill string testing. So we'll put an inflatable packer down the hole. So we'll run wire lines first and identify where the reservoir units are. Then we'll put an inflatable packers down the hole, isolate that unit with these inflatable packers, and run a test through those packers to determine how much helium is flowing out of that reservoir, and to take samples of the gas that we've discovered. So by August and September of this year, we should be in a position of being able to say, yes, we have helium under the ground. Yes, it is at this grade. And then we can start the process of running feasibility studies and define the engineering and the economics of what should be a world-class project.
Well, there's the key word, the economics, right? So you're an explorer. You're right at the beginning of the process here. And to get to the point where more importantly, the market understand the economics, you've got a bit of work to do. And I keep coming about this because, again, there's such big parallels in other sectors. And I think rare earths is always a good one, where people don't understand it, so they avoid it. And you've got to educate the market, get people comfortable around your economics or your version of events to be able to sustain that interest. Because having a good response straight after listing, normal. Pretty normal, right? You've got to sustain that interest. So you just said August, September is a point at which you can maybe give a bit more clarity around what it is that you've got. Do you feel that you're going to have to talk to, maybe do some infill in terms of the communication? What are you going to be able to tell us between now and then?
Well, I mean, coming back to what you said right at the start, a lot of people don't know what helium's for. They don't know what the usage is. They don't know what a success case is defined as. And as you rightly pointed, there's been a lot of niche commodities where a lot of people there haven't been the success cases which were promised. However, when you look at the technical basics, the fundamentals of this project, and build it from the ground up, from just from a purely geological technical point of view, the grade in the ground is 200 times higher than anything which is currently in production. The size of the project at 138 billion cubic feet has the potential to provide a meaningful quantity of the world market for over 100 years. We're talking about something which is globally strategic. This isn't going to be a price taker. It's going to be a price maker. If we want to reduce the price to bring out latent supply, we produce more helium, the price goes down. This is the swing supplier for helium over the next 100 years. And that's what makes it globally strategic. That's why we come back to saying again and again, this is potentially a globally strategic asset, because this changes how this commodity is provided over the next century.
Okay, we finally got to some pretty big statements from you there. Okay, so you're talking about 100 years price maker, and you're talking about the size of what of the resource that you think you've got under the ground there. So why don't you produce a study now which says, hey, just as a marker in the sand, this is what we're talking about? Because right now I think people are looking at you as an exploration story with a long way to go and no reason to kind of get interested. So if you know so much, can you not put some kind of economic study in place now?
Well, to be honest, I think we've done as much as we can before we make a discovery. I mean, we've done high-level economic studies. So we've done engineering study based on a theoretical gas composition from what we've seen at surface, and that's the result of that was to get 350,000 MCF of production a year. The planned capital cost would be about $50 million. So
okay.
it's
can you just tell me the terminology, David? You said we've done as much as we can before we've made a discovery. Okay, so that language, suggests that you've got a bit more work to do. So how can you put 100-year life of mine on the equivalent life of resource on it? How can you say we're a price maker? How can you put what was the number?
138 billion cubic feet.
Right. How can you do that without having a known resource?
These are using the oil and gas terminology, best estimate unrisked prospective recoverable resources.
Got it.
So this is a number from an independent study. We've had two done, one by Neville and Swell, NSAI, and one by SRK. And they have independently verified these numbers based on the seismics which we have, the concentrations we've seen in the gas that's coming up to surface. This is the best estimate of what we could discover if we were to drill all of our prospects and traps.
Got it. Okay.
Obviously, this will be refined once we've drilled and made, the flow in. That will de-risk the entire basin and will give us a better idea of what we might potentially find once we know what the fill point is on the traps which we drilled. So it's to be refined, but at the moment, it's the best estimate.
Perfect. And so again, just drawing comparisons to other commodities, which is just that little bit more technical, like your uraniums or your lithiums of this world. With helium, is there the same degree of difficulty in terms of extracting the helium component? Or is it well-established technology? It's
well-established. I mean, the engineering study that we've done, basically, if you can imagine in the Qatar oil field, they've got a $23 billion liquid natural gas plant, and then a $50 million porta cabin on the side, which takes the effluent from that and separates the helium out. We've just taken that $50 million collection of porta cabins and moved it out into the plains of Rukwa.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. I mean, you've literally done that. You've literally done it because you talk in your PowerPoint again about the kind of CapEx component here of around $50 million. What's the point at which you start having to make those decisions? Just to give us a sense of the timeline moving forward.
What do you mean about the decisions?
Well, I think like this year you're saying we've got $6 million. We're going to do our infill seismic. We're going to do a bit of drilling. We're going to, we know we're going to in 2021. But what's the point at which you start having to talk the language of raising more capital, and whatever kind of operational additions you need to make to the company.
I mean, we're fully financed to complete this exploration that we're doing now. So we took six million. We had more on the table, but we decided to take 6 because that finances the infill seismic and the 3 drill holes. Once we've completed the exploration, once we've made a discovery, we're going to need to raise finance to complete the feasibility studies, the field evaluation program, and the engineering on surface. That will hopefully be done at a big premium because we've made a discovery. And then once we've completed the feasibilities and the engineering, then we know what the economics of the project definitively are going to look like. We can start raising the equity, debt, and what we need to do to bring it into production.
And again, the sense of the timing on that. What's your expectation? The next couple of years, I guess.
Probably start working on ideally keep the rig out in the field and roll over straight from discovery drilling into field evaluation. So complete that in the second half of next year. Of this year. Keep forgetting it's January. Engineering wise would run in parallel to that. Looking at a feasibility complete in the first half of 2022, and then fast track it into production as soon as we can after that.
Okay.
Probably targeting first helium in 2023.
Okay. That's quite kind of where I wanted to get to, because sometimes these exploration plays where my experience would be in natural gas, with the need to raise more and more capital to do more and more drilling to understand the size of the prize, as it were. What they've got in the ground, just it runs and runs and runs, and the catalyst moments that they hope for just sometimes aren't catalyst moments at all. What's in their head and what the market thinks are two different things. So.
And these are very conventional gas traps. It's actually directly analogous to the Albertine Basin in Uganda, both in terms of the geology and the geometry of the traps, but also in the discovery. I mean, Tullow Oil made that discovery based on oil seeps around the edge of the Rift Basin. Went in and drilled it. They actually had an 80% success rate on their drill holes, and built a company. We've come in and found helium seeps around the Rift Basin, pegged the entire fairway, and now we're coming in to drill it. But I mean, these aren't geologically complex. We're not looking at sort of fracture hosting. This is normal lakebed sandstones with mudstone seals in well understood trapping styles. It's a very conventional project in terms of geology.
So who should we be looking at as investors? You talked about the big boys and their production, etc. You're not going to compete with them. You're talking about being a primary producer. There are some names you've mentioned in the PowerPoint. They're not very big companies. There may have been a little spurt of growth in each case as they've maybe started at different points in the cycle. But going forward, who are you trying to be like? Or is this just still quite a nascent industry for the primary producers?
That's a good question, because it is very, very hard to find a comparable case. And there aren't many occasions where something with the potential to be globally strategic comes on and is available to the retail market at such an early stage of its development cycle. We're trading at 8p at the moment. Once we make a discovery, once we become that swing supplier, who knows what our price is going to be. It's very hard because there's no real comparables of something which is 50 times bigger and 200 times higher grade than existing producers and explorers. Who do you peg it against?
Well, I don't know. That's why I was quite keen to talk to you, because there's a lot of companies talking the talk, but we've not sort of seen any reflection in share price or growth really. And you're all quite small companies. I think one of the, you're 40 million pounds. You've talked about some other $100 million type companies. So it's early days. And I guess that's another thing which would be maybe a barrier for some people. Some people might get excited because of the leverage, and others would be turned off by it. So the data in the market is quite important. And that's why I was wondering, where you think we should be looking.
I mean, I'll turn that question around back back to you, and maybe your viewers will have an idea of examples of globally strategic projects which have come from this exploration stage into the development stage. I mean, yeah.
Well, I think the trouble is that there's more people lying on the sides of the tracks than there are racing ahead. That's why it's very important to know what you're getting into, and more importantly, your ability to deliver that. So in terms of obviously we know Ian Stalker, the old warhorse, been around the block, certainly in Africa. You've got a good team there, but what I'm trying to get a sense of is have you got a very clear business plan, and do you know how you're going to deliver it? And I think you've outlined some of the deliverables.
We know how we're going to make a discovery. We know how we're going to bring it into production. My background is that I'm a geologist. I'm a technical guy. I get things done. And I mean, the market will look after itself. If we make a globally significant discovery, we can bring it into production on a low capex, high margin type of production. We agree the offtakes. We engineer it and we deliver it. The market will value that as the market values that. Yeah,
I mean, like I say, I think it will, but it'd be great to have some kind of use cases. I saw some cases out there of who's doing it and where the margins get shaved, and the partnerships that need to be formed. And like if I'm looking down the completely the other end of the supply chain, is there a well established and well trodden path to actually sell helium into the market, and how is that done? Or do you need to have, or do intermediaries going to step in the middle there? I mean, how much control do you retain, and for how long?
I mean, most helium and how we would intend to market our helium is sold through industrial majors, and that's because they've got the logistics and the book of buyers. They have the market. We would be looking to target a number of end users as well, buying our own trucks to deliver it. The reason being that the industrial majors put a significant markup on their supply, and if we can capture that value, then we would. However, I mean, our primary job is to be a producer. I'm not going to, when we haven't got the time or the capacity to build up an order book of 100 different end users. We want to get into production and focus on our speciality.
Okay. Do you think because of this growing gap between supply and demand, and the fact that you can't synthesize this product, there's going to be a degree of price insensitivity moving forward? You talked about moving from $200 to $350 in no short order. Can you see this thing moving even higher?
I mean, there is certainly price insensitivity in terms of a demand. As I mentioned earlier, anything which could be substituted out has been substituted out, and the remainders are price takers. I mean, but to be honest, we will be a high margin producer at any price because of the grade of helium that we have in the ground and our low capital cost. The operating costs are sort of very small. We're talking about $15 to $20 per MCF. So we're not price sensitive in terms of our economics, not really.
Right. No, I'm not worried about this end. I'm worried about the other end. And again, how far can you push it? Because if you've kind of got a kind of competitive tension in terms of your ability to distribute, it gives you options. You're in control in a way as to where you sell to. And if there's a lack of product in the market and there's a price insensitivity further down that chain, then it doesn't affect your ability to maintain or grow margin. That's where I was getting at.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. There you go. we got there. Dave, I'm just kind of conscious of time here because I know you've got places to be. Well, bags to pack. And I've got another one lined up in the next 3 minutes. But look, I appreciate this, and sorry for some of the dumb questions, but it's from a position of it's hard to get much information about this space. because there are not too many players out there, which is great. The macro story is clear, and I'm just intrigued as to your ability to be able to deliver into that, and where you're going to fit, how you insert yourself. So, what are the things we should be looking out for next, just to give us something to latch onto?
And in terms of Helium 1, our next step would be to mobilise the seismic crew. We'll get a lot more information on the subsurface geology and help to refine our drill targeting. We'll then be mobilising drilling in Q2 and with reporting results throughout Q2 and into Q3. I think that's where the real evaluation catalyst is going to be, in making that discovery and flowing helium gas to the surface.
Beautiful. We'll look out for those. Stay in touch. Pick up the phone. Let us know how you're getting on. We'd love to hear the story and maybe update people on how you're getting on.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk.